because it created a lot of disruptions, a lot of very unhappy circles in Europe when we talk about Chinese engagement in the alternative energy or solar energy industry in Europe. Looking at the amount of transactions. Now, the amount of transactions, as we've seen before, country-wise, it's different. So country-wise, we have made a comparison again between the number of transactions or the number of products and services in certain countries and the amount of transactions. So the amount of money that was actually used to flow into those projects. And we have seen the differences country-wise with looking at the regional distribution. Now looking at the amount of transaction. What picture do we have here? Looking at the amount of transactions, we see that first, a lot of money flew into chemical, plastics, and rubber. Which is here again, looking here at the amount that was actually invested. With regards to the chemical, plastic, and rubber industry, we see even though the number of projects or the number of transactions has not been very high, but actually the money that flew into those sectors has been a lot. Of course, that goes without saying because it requires a lot of investment if you get into the chemical industry, doing rubber production and getting into plastics manufacturing, whatever. So of course, naturally, investment into those areas require a very high level of money flowing into. Now we have, on number 2, we have public utilities and health services. It's very interesting. This is not been expected that Chinese companies would try that much to get into the areas of public utilities and health services. Now, what does this include? There are quite some Chinese good players in the health service sector providing medical equipment and the like to Europe. And of course, looking at other markets, having tried to get access to the very well-established market, the very good technology, the very big know-how in Europe in that sector. Number 3 is the automotive, original equipment and spare parts manufacturing. This again goes without saying. With regards to the rapid global development, with regards to the development of the Chinese market, Chinese invested a lot in the automotive industry. On the one side, to speed up the internal development, to improve quality, to raise the technological standard for its own automotive industry, while on the other side also trying to get into foreign markets. So here again, the Chinese industry is in somehow a dilemma. Of course, there is big requirement in China for local, for automobiles. But if you look at foreign brands in the automotive sector in China, they're hard to beat. You still have the big players. The big players intend to invest billions and billions over the next year to expand their own production facilities on the Chinese market. They will do that and they will succeed. So even though as a big Chinese automobile manufacturing company, you have problems because you only get to a certain segment of the industry. It's very difficult to achieve that high level of branding. It's very, very difficult to compete with those foreign brands. So what do they have to do? They need to go overseas. Now, going overseas is, of course, looking at overseas markets where you are able to sell cars and vehicles for the mass market at the first step. There's no way for China to have such high-level cars and high-brand cars at this moment that they would be able to compete with European brands. Globally, there is no way. You can't. So this takes some time, but they know that there is a market for Chinese type vehicles. They know that there is a good environment in certain countries, but they do need to raise the technological standard. And they only can do that by acquiring know-how, by acquiring market understanding, by acquiring brands in the automotive industry. And this would explain, of course, why such a high level of financial commitment and resources commitment from the Chinese side is in the automotive industry when it comes to Europe. We see the picture here again, it's just to compare and just to figure out, looking at those numbers, and we have seen when we just look at the numbers of transactions actually being realized, we have here industrial machinery. Again, we have telecom equipment, which is just on top, but we will see why this telecom equipment, as I said, it's not 10 companies, but it's just a single player or two players yet. And then, of course, we have here, going a little bit further again, alternative energy. This is the picture what we've seen here. The numbers of transactions and the amount do differ. So here again, later we will see what will be the traditional sectors, how Chinese got into Europe, and how it will change, or how difficult it is and what challenges there are trying to get from the traditional sectors into other sectors where you are much closer to the customer. There's some very interesting examples. There's one very good example of a very big Chinese company being quite big globally, doing quite well in Europe, but starting to phase up a series of questions and a series of problems and challenges they never had thought about before. And it's very interesting. They started off in a certain segment where they only supplied to big companies in Europe, big providers. So in Europe, actually, outside that very specific environment of that specific industry field, nobody actually knew about them. You know, the normal consumer, he didn't know. They didn't appear in the newspapers. Nobody knew. They were just supplying and providing very, very and excellent good quality. But in the process of overseas development, they figured out that they need to get into the markets in order to expand with new products and new services. So the new products and new services would mean that they have to get closer and closer to the customer base. Because you have the market there, you have the customers there, and you have to approach the customer. Now, as they did that cautiously, they tried to use their experience in the traditional sector they've done before to approach the customer. So just trying to tell them, hey guys, you know, we have very good quality, we have very good products, we are very reliable. But they faced up to a lot of problems, to a series of problems, because suddenly they got onto the surface. You know, in the past they were just down there and nobody noticed them and they were very quiet and very good. And suddenly getting into other market segments, they got closer and closer to the surface of the market. And being closer to the surface of the market means, on the one side, it's a good thing because you get closer to the customer. On the other side, it's a complicated thing because you get closer to transparency. And you are